Good morning and welcome to the third installment of the ACT series. This installment will be focusing on the English portion of the ACT. The last two installments were focused on the reading portion of the ACT. We're going to focus now on the English portion today, just the basics, and then we'll move on to some more application after in the last installment of this series. Our objectives today are to introduce the basics of the ACT English test, draw correlations between the ACT English test and the reading and writing ropes, and connect the skills for the ACT English test to our high-quality instructional materials. So, quick little overview of what is on this test, the basics of this test. This is the first of the 4 subtests. The students will always take this before any other subtests. It's 75 questions, 5 passages, and they get 45 minutes to take the test. The passages are not set in any certain order or about any type of specific content area like the reading test is. And the test itself focuses on the use of English conventions and the use of language. So students will not necessarily have to do a whole lot of comprehension work with these passages. There are 3 reporting categories, just like there were 3 in the reading test. They are different, obviously. The first one is CSE, or Conventions of Standard English. That's the majority of the test. It takes up a little bit more than half, with about 40 questions on every single test. Production of Writing, or POW, is the second one. That's about 20 questions on every test. And then Knowledge of Language Acquisition, or KLA, is 10 to 12 questions on every test. And for this test, the benchmark score that determines college readiness is an 18. That is what colleges are looking for in terms of admissions as well. So if you remember, we did look at this chart last time. I want to refresh your memories here. ACT is a college readiness test that sets benchmarks in each category of the test to give information on a student's predicted ability to succeed in education after high school. Our students who are going to 2-year programs, or who are not 4-year college bound, can definitely still benefit from this test. They can still earn TOPS and other scholarship money for their success on the ACT. So when we're discussing benchmark scores here, if you look at this table that was posted from some research that ACT.org did, it highlights all the different benchmarks for each of the subject areas. We'll be focusing today on the English, where it determines kids' ability to do well in English comp. If you have dual enrollment students, this is also what they're going to often be looking at to see if they're ready to take on dual enrollment, depending on your dual enrollment program and what the different requirements are. So if you need to refresh this, feel free to pause, look at this a little bit more in depth, but we have covered this already in the first 2 sessions as well. And then again, I want to remind you of the graph that was pulled from the same research, just to reiterate that while not every kid who doesn't meet benchmark is going to not finish their program in college or their associate's degree, there is some data that suggests there is a very strong correlation in a student's success in completing their degree program and how many benchmarks they have met. This is new and not new. The chart that you see, the 2 charts you see here, are what you will find at the back of all release practice tests. The one that you see to your left is the answer key for an English test. It provides the correct answer, and then it also has the reporting category that each question falls into. And those reporting categories are really what we're going to be discussing a lot today. The image to the right is the scoring chart. Remember, these change slightly depending on which test you're looking at, but in general is only by a few questions, 1 or 2 questions. So you'll see for the English test, around 36 to 37 questions is an 18. I've seen it go all the way up to 40 questions being an 18, so it does kind of vary a bit. So just make sure you're checking that whenever you are working with any kind of release practice materials with your students. One thing that I wanted to let you all know, that if you're wondering how to get your hands on these practice release tests, ACT online, or ACT.org, is where kids register for the test online. When they register for tests, they can also purchase something called their TIR to be sent to them after they take that test, and it's only for certain months, so they may not see it if it's not available that month. And what will happen is ACT will send that student the test, their answers, and the key, and they can see what they missed, and they can use that to go over with a tutor or in class with you. But that's also how you can get some release practice tests as well. Just an FYI. Okay, so Our English subtest, or on the English subtest, students will be asked to apply their knowledge of language conventions and usage to the test. They will not be asked simple questions about parts of speech or isolated punctuation. Like they won't be asked which part of this sentence is a noun. Like that's not what they're going to be asked. They're going to be asked to apply what they know about how to use a comma correctly or how to properly develop a complex sentence. They'll be presented with questions that require them to know the foundational conventions of English, but in an application-based format. So it's heavily aligned to the language structures and vocabulary strands on Scarborough's reading rope, which is the framework that represents the various areas of literacy that is needed to be a skilled reader. So while this test may seem based in writing, which it technically is, it is also part of the reading rope because remember, literacy encompasses more than just reading skills, but it's also writing, speaking, and listening. So on this test in particular, we'll also be looking at their ability to write well. So this rope you have not seen before. This rope and Scarborough's reading rope have many overlapping strands, further reinforcing that good readers are good writers are good readers and vice versa. This is the writing rope that was founded through Joan Sedita's work. You'll see that there's a lot of overlap on these two throughout the categories. The ACT asks students to demonstrate proficiency in critical thinking via revising writing, syntax, will be assessed via grammar and punctuation. Text structures will be assessed via paragraph structures, patterns of organization, and linking or transition phrases. And then lastly, in the writing craft strand, they will be assessed via word choice and audience or purpose. And students who excel at these in their regular writing should also kind of do well on the ACT with some thoughtful, direct, and explicit instruction through their time in their secondary ELA classrooms. So again, these skills that they need to be able to perform on the ACT do not exist in the vacuum of just the ACT. They are things that the students will need to be able to do in their own writing as well to be considered good communicators. So let's go ahead and dive into the actual question categories on the test. The first one we're going to look at is the biggest one, CSE, or Conventions of Standard English. The good news is that the foundational conventions this test is trying to assess, not foreign or uncommon. These are all things that our students need to be able to master in order to be successful communicators via writing. The majority of the test is grammar and punctuation focused questions, and we have plenty of opportunities to teach these skills using our high quality instructional materials and our curriculums. So this often won't require much extra work on the teacher's part to embed into your teaching. In fact, you may already be doing a lot of this stuff. You just need to make sure that you direct your students to understand that this is a skill they will need for the ACT as well. Because as we've spoken about in previous webinars, letting students know their purpose and why they're learning something, especially when they get to these secondary grades, is key to helping it stick better. So the questions that fall under the CSE category or Conventions of Standard English make up 40 of the 75 questions. And this is where you're going to get the most bang for your buck in terms of the test. But these are also vital basic skills that students need to be able to write effectively. This test may be a little bit daunting, but just remember to put it into perspective that these skills are not solely skills to teach the test. Tell the students that, like, this is going to be on the test, but this is also what's going to make you a good writer and a good communicator when you have to send out, not just when you're writing reports or writing essays, but when you have to send out an email in the future or things like that. They need to be able to learn how to craft the English language together to be able to effectively communicate with others. So the next slides will be some examples of how students are asked to apply their CSE knowledge from a 2021 release test. But just if you look on your screen, this is the type of grammar that the majority of the test will focus on. Students will need to know various ways to use commas. They'll need to know how to use semicolon, colons, dashes, apostrophes, especially when showing possession in terms of singular versus plural. They'll need to know subject-verb agreement. They'll need to know commonly confused words like then versus than. I've seen cite versus cite. So there's a bunch of different ones that show up often. And then they'll also need to know pronoun-noun agreement or singular versus plural. And this correlates to the reading strand, the reading rope on the language structure, but also the syntax strand of the writing rope as well, just to kind of keep in perspective that this is all connected to what good readers and writers are able to do. So let's look at some examples. So if you look on the screen, I've got several examples of different types of CSE questions that are kind of marked with the yellow boxes. And on just this page alone, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 questions that are CSE, just to kind of prove the point that it is the majority of the test. So Note that unlike the reading test, there are not question stems for these types of questions. In fact, most of these questions on this page don't have a question attached to it. They're just looking into the corresponding line in the passage to figure out the answer. So looking at the answer choices is a better indicator of which of the skills is being tested. So like if you look in your answer choices and you notice that all of them are clearly moving the comma around or adding commas, it's a comma question. If you look in your answer choices and you notice you've got periods and semicolons and commas, they've got to be able to address all three of those different pieces of punctuation. So that's kind of how you can tell like which grammar skill. We'll discuss more of how to ensure you're teaching these skills in the next session, but basic grammar instruction in the high school classroom typically should cover these types of skills. It is just a matter of reinforcing the skills to the students, as well as making sure they understand that while this is part of being a good writer, it is heavily tested on this test as well. So making sure that they're incorporating this into their own writing and effectively doing so, making sure your feedback is focused on these things when you're giving them writing feedback is powerful. Using mentor sentences, things like that. But we'll get more in depth with that in the next session of this series, where we'll look at how to actually embed it into some curriculum as well. Oh, there we go. All right. So some other ones. These are a couple other ones I just wanted to kind of like, zone in on. These answer choices show us the skills that are being tested once again in questions 39 and then questions 34, 35, and 36. Typically, if you look at question 39, that is a pronoun-noun agreement question. Those answer choices will have all pronouns for answer choices. That's how you know you're on a pronoun-noun question. Occasionally, you will have 3 pronouns and a noun as your answer choice, but still, when you have all these pronouns as your answer choices, that should tip off that you are on a pronoun-noun question. And you can teach your kids that too, because there's different approaches, or there's specific approaches they can take to answering those questions. They're just trying to test if the student knows how to use the correct pronoun in a sentence in terms of singular versus plural for the most part. Same thing with subject verb agreement questions. They will have answer choices that are all verbs. Teaching kids to recognize that as well will help them approach the question correctly, because if they know that they're on a subject verb agreement question, they know that their verb has to correlate to their subject, and they need to know if their subject is plural or singular to be able to pick the correct verb. So again, testing that singular versus plural and how to write correctly when using it is all over the test. But they need to write and they need to speak with proper agreement in these areas as well. So that's something you can very easily incorporate into your instruction, making sure that your feedback is focused on these types of things when you see that they maybe have holes in it, or even setting up some intervention or some support for students who may need this in their own writing. So just take a moment to look over these so you can see what the questions look like, and then we'll move on to some more examples of the further reporting categories. So second category is production of writing, or POW. I typically tell students that for these questions, they should try to think their best, or do their best to think like they are an editor, or like they are revising some writing, because that is what they're doing with these questions. These questions make up about 20 questions per test, and they will ask students about adding or deleting information, meaning they will have to evaluate if the information is relevant or necessary to the passage in that particular spot of the text. Organization of both sentences and paragraphs in terms of what makes the most logical sense in the context of the passage. This could include both introduction of ideas, transitions, and conclusions, as well as sentence placement within a particular paragraph. They'll also maybe even need to look and see how the entire paragraph is structured. Is it a compare contrast? Is it written chronologically? Are they describing a space from left to right or top to bottom? And like figuring out where that information would make the most sense if they did want to add it in. These are sometimes a little harder for students to do, but the more practice they have with both seeing good writing through their high quality instructional material and actually producing good writing, the better they will fare on this portion. So students are already writing in our classes. We need to make sure we're leveraging that writing for teaching them skills that they'll need here, but also improving their writing. We don't want them to just write, miss a bunch of stuff that we tell them they got wrong, and then never give them the chance to remediate that. We need to find ways to ensure that they are able to correct mistakes and learn from their mistakes. And then hopefully in the future, they won't continue to do the same thing. So these questions look a little different than the CSE questions. These are the ones that you'll notice actually have a question attached to them, whereas the CSE questions do not. The most important thing you can tell your students with writing is the need for them to be concise, because ACT is always, always, always going to want them to pick the most concise and grammatically correct response. So that is the key to their success on this test. And in terms of just being a good communicator in general, we don't want them to say something they can say in one sentence using 12 sentences. So that's something that you can kind of start to build into your writing instruction as well, is to make sure that students are being concise, because on ACT, they may have 3 answer choices that all kind of say the same thing, but one of them says it much more concisely than the other, and they need to know that that's the correct way to use language to be direct and concise with what we're trying to say to people through our writing. Some other examples, just to kind of show you, you can feel free to pause your video to see these more in depth. 37 and 38 are good examples of the importance of teaching about author's purpose, and including only including relevant information in your own writing, and then paragraph structure through question 45, or paragraph structure instruction will help with these types of questions. So think about how we always want students to refer back to their thesis and their conclusion, and why that's so important, and how they can do that effectively, so they know to apply that to when they are editing someone else's writing as well, which is essentially what they're doing on this test, for these types of questions at least. And then questions 7 through 9 are also all production of writing questions as well. So students are having to demonstrate how to effectively and concisely, once again, write, or in this case, edit. Number 8 is an example of using transitions correctly. And this is something students struggle with a lot. So teaching them how to use transitions and when to use transitions correctly is important. A lot of times they don't even realize that certain words are considered transition phrases or words. Like, I've had many kids tell me they never even knew that nonetheless was a real word. So just teaching them things like that, of like, we use this phrase or word when we're trying to move to an opposite idea or a similar idea. When we're comparing, things like that can go a long way as well. And it sounds like it's very basic, but I think we take for granted that in high school they know how to do this already, and sometimes they need to be reminded, and they need it to be reinforced. All right, and let's look at the final category. The third and final reporting category is knowledge of language, or KLA. It only makes up about 10 to 12 questions on this test. They are typically questions that a lot of students will struggle with, mostly because they are usually about word choice and conciseness. However, many times students struggle with these because the ACT does assume that they have a certain level of knowledge of vocabulary. And unfortunately, there's not some definitive list of words that students can study for this. The ACT doesn't have a vocab list that they can put out. So kids have to be able to use kind of like their context clues. They have to be able to understand how to be concise with their wording to be able to pick the correct answer for these. So if you look at the examples on the screen, students have to select words based not only on definition, but also in context of the passage or of the sentence, or based on connotation. So the good news is that this is something you can focus on in your readings in class to help prep them. You can talk about why would an author choose to use a specific word that they did instead of a different word that might mean the same thing, and talk about how this specific word they used conveys a message that is stronger for, whatever reasons that is, depending on the word, and how it fits into the context of the passage. And then helping students even in your feedback on their writing of word choice. They may have used a word that wasn't the strongest word they could use there, or that didn't quite mean what they thought it meant in that context, and teach them how to incorporate better choices in their words when they are writing. These are a couple more examples of KLA questions. Again, you'll notice that many times most of the answer choices generally mean the same thing. And with these types of questions, students need to be able to pick the best and most concise answer. A lot of times it is the shortest answer. I'm not saying 100% of the time it's the shortest answer, but when they only have a one-word answer to pick from, that's when they get a little tripped up. They need to be able to, even if they don't know what every word means on the answer choice list, they need to kind of be able to use their context clues to try to figure out what word would best fit, even if it's through process of elimination for the words that they do know. Okay, so let's kind of apply this here. Here are some things that you can do to make sure that not only you are explicitly teaching in your classroom, but also having students apply within their own writing as well. So subject-verb agreement is a big one. This is something that can be practiced through their own writing, can be looked at through mentor sentences, can be taught through mini lessons, can be taught in small group, in interventions. All of these things, honestly, can be taught through all those different means and methods. Identifying dependent versus independent clauses. high school students need to be reminded how to do this. I know that they're supposedly taught this much earlier on, but that doesn't mean that just because they were taught it, that they've retained it over the years. So you're going to have to make sure that you are going over these with them. The various functions of commas, especially when it comes to joining two independent clauses or joining or making a complex sentence. Essential versus non-essential clauses are also really heavily tested on the ACT, and generally in terms of like, where do you put the commas? Proper usage of semicolons, colons, dashes, and apostrophes is very frequent on the test. Effective use of transitional words and phrases, and pronoun-noun agreement, and paragraph structure. All of these are things that we already have in our curriculums. We should already be teaching in our classrooms. It's just a matter of maybe bringing a little bit more awareness to those topics and spotlighting them a little bit more heavily when we can, and making sure students know that this is something they're going to see on that test as well. So the high quality instructional material that's being used in your classrooms via your tier 1 curriculums have many opportunities for you to practice a variety of the skills that we've mentioned in this presentation. There are also many approaches you could take to implement the said strategy. So I'm not going to go over all of them right now, but I will be giving some specific examples of ways to tackle this at the next session. But in the meantime, I really challenge you to try and find 1 or 2 ways to incorporate one of these skills into your instruction. And I'd love to hear back from you about how that went. So feel free to reach out to us at louisianaliteracy.gov to let me know what you've done, how it worked, or if something didn't work, so we can kind of troubleshoot of how to make it better. Remember, students need to be told that this is an ACT skill and that they are skills that are used to improve their writing. So they should always know that purpose for their learning. So I appreciate your attention today as we reviewed the basics of the ACT English test. Again, please feel free to reach out for further support to louisianaliteracy@la.gov. And we will be going over more specifics of how to incorporate this into your instruction at the next session. I hope you guys have a great day, and don't hesitate to reach out if you need it.